Good evening, everyone. It's a great joy to be here tonight. Time has flown by quickly. I want to thank Keith and Peggy Doucette for having me at their home, such gracious, kind people. And poor Keith is going to get up with me well before the chickens get up tomorrow because I have a plane that leaves at 6 a.m. Back home. But I actually go to end up in Massachusetts, and I'll be speaking Wednesday and Thursday to a group of probably 150 doctors and nurses about divine mercy. And one of my talks is science and faith, are they contradictory? So I was working on that today. A couple loose ends I wanted to clear up from last evening. Someone asked me to explain a little bit more on the cenacle. The name cenacle came from the upper room where the Last Supper took place. Jesus appeared to the apostles after he rose, and also where Pentecost was. And it's merely a Divine Mercy prayer group that uses the Diary of Faustina, the Catechism and the Scripture, and our formation manuals, which are in the back. There's 3 manuals, and it's just a very slow process through the diary. The diary takes care of itself, but it follows what we call a small Christian community format of prayer. It starts with song, prayer, and then faith sharing, which is the most important part, because you go through what you read, and then we have prayers of petition, and then the chaplet, and then some social time. But you really get close to each other, and you share your faith, and anytime you come together to talk about God, really only good things can result. So that's what a cenacle is. A gentleman came up afterwards last night, and when I was talking about the different people I've met and the wonderful things I've seen, he asked me if I knew about Stanley Villavicencio in the Philippines, and I said, yes, I've been to Stanley's home. I knew Stanley. Stanley died a year ago, but Stanley, many years ago, was an alcoholic. He was struggling with his alcoholism. He had severe liver disease, but he got into Divine Mercy and was spreading Divine Mercy and doing wonders, but his liver disease was severe, and he had a complication from that in that he started bleeding. His mother-in-law found him in their home one morning. He was covered in blood, no pulse, no EKG, a flat line. He was basically declared dead. They rushed him to the hospital. They said there's nothing more they could do for him. And the family, though, didn't give up. They kept breathing with a bag and pumping on his heart. And after quite a period of time, many, many hours of this, Stanley woke up. And during this period of near death or death, the Lord appeared to him as Divine Mercy and said, I want you to go out and spread Divine Mercy, which he did for many years all over the world. The medical resident, the cardiology resident that was working on Stanley had such a conversion over the thing that he left medicine and became a priest. So, another gentleman I met a couple years ago, he was a very wealthy attorney out of New York, and he worked on the stock exchange. Had made millions of dollars. Many times, sometimes there is a difference between illegal and immoral. And, people think, well, we can do it because it's not illegal, even though it may be immoral or unethical. But he was very wealthy, and for some unknown reason, he went into severe liver failure, unexplained liver failure, and he had suffered and was near death. They kept waiting. He was on a transplant list. But no transplant ever appeared. He was just a few hours from death. The doctor said, they called the wife in and said, this is it, he's not going to make it. And he was totally jaundiced, comatose, virtually gone. And while he was right near death, the Lord appeared to him and said that, as Divine Mercy, and said, why did you do all these things? Why didn't you live the good Christian life that you were raised? And the good attorney started debating the Lord, and he said the Lord was such a tremendous debater and orator that even with all his attorney skills, he had no defense. It was just the Lord kept cutting his legs out. And he said he was going to put him in hell. And Mother Mary showed up and said, why don't we send him back and give him a second chance? And so the Lord listened to his mother, and he told him, I want you to go back and live a holy, good life and make a difference. And he woke up. His liver slowly over the next few days totally turned to normal. His liver functions returned to normal. His jaundice was gone. And he was living in New York, got out of the stock market, real estate, and his attorney practice, and didn't know where he was going to end up. And the pastor in his parish said, well, why don't you get involved in prison ministry, which he did. And over the next several years, one thing led to the other. And he felt called to move to Stark, Florida, just 3 hours north of me. And he eventually became the chaplain. His wife, they moved there, and they live in this very modest house. And he's the chaplain for the death row inmates. And he counsels the death row inmates and gets them ready for death. And his wife is part of the team, and they counsel the families that come in and know that their dad or mom or whatever is going to be executed. And he talks about his work in the prison ministry. So those are a couple guys. Another gentleman was a priest who lived in Kerala, India. And on Divine Mercy Sunday in 1985, he was riding back home, and he got hit on his motorcycle and broke 100 and some bones. He was dead, declared dead. They had a white sheet put over him. And while he was dead, he had his body. He looked down and he saw all these people. They began to work on him, and then they realized he was dead. And the Lord came to him and said, I want you to go back, but this time I want you to be a holy priest, which he wasn't. And he's on fire for Divine Mercy and the truths of the church and the faith, and just is a wonderful evangelist. So those are just a few people that I've come encounter with. So it kind of spurs you on, and you realize that there is a world beyond this one. It's a world we can't see, but that's what faith is. Faith is believing in things not seen. As I mentioned last night, I'm not a theologian. I was thinking on the way over here that a lot of these things tonight and the things I talked about last night are just lessons I've learned, many of them from my own mistakes. And it seems in my life God uses me. I make these mistakes, and then years later they come back, and God shows me and uses me in some ways that, but I'm getting tired of making all these mistakes. But anyways, tonight I want to talk about the Blessed Mother and the gift of life. So, just a Catholic teaching 101, we as Catholics believe in the communion of saints. We're really one big family. Just because people die doesn't mean they're gone from us. We have the Trinity, we have Mary, the Mother of Jesus, St. Joseph, and all the saints interceding for us. Many saints spoke of how their work really was going to begin after they got to heaven. We have a picture of Padre Pio and St. Therese in our office, and to non-Catholics they're like, what is that all about? But again, we're one big happy family, and that's what the church is, okay? Our Lady of Mother of Mercy, years ago after I had sold my practice, trying to sort out where the Lord wanted me, so I worked in a prison. I was the head doctor at maximum security prisons. And in some ways I loved it because, I treated them all as best I could. And these were not the best people in society, but I really enjoyed it. And I was working with a physician's assistant one day, and out of the blue he starts telling me, you Catholics worship statues, you love Mary way too much, and where's that in the Bible, and la la la. And I was just like, whoa, what's this all about, So I guess just a couple simple questions for you. How many of you have pictures in your wallet or on your wall of your family? Do you have pictures? Yeah, we all do, don't we? Now, Thomas Aquinas said it best. He said, you're not worshiping the statue or the pictures. I'm not worshiping a Kodak film. I'm not worshiping this picture that's on my desk of my family. I'm loving and honoring and cherishing the people represented in the picture. So when they say you worship statues, we're not worshiping the concrete. We're just showing respect and love for the person that's represented in the statue. He also thrown at me, you people love Mary too much. Next. So I thought, well, I could tell you wonderful stories about my mother. Born and raised in a dirt poor family. She loved my father. She, I don't think, graduated from high school because she had to care for all her brothers and sisters. She had a lot of pain and suffering in her life. I just remember her as being so kind, never degrading me, never ridiculing me, always there to give me a word of comfort. Probably my most memorable experience, I remember in high school, we were playing football, and we were playing for the league championship, and it was near the end of the game, and I caught this one pass and helped the drive going. We ended up scoring, and Mom came running across the field, and gave me a big hug, and she was so proud of me. She's gone now, but no one could love my mom the way I love my mom. I don't think anyone could love your mother the way you love your mother. And if you think about it, Jesus and Mary, could anybody really love Mary like Jesus loved Mary? Could we really love Mary too much? Think of the love when Jesus is on the Via Dolorosa and their eyes crossed. Remember in the movie The Passion that their eyes crossed? And the pain, the pain. I see my kids in pain and it just kills me. But they weren't being scourged and beaten and put nails in their hands, and they never did anything wrong. So could we really love Mary too much? I don't think so. Okay? Remember Simeon, Jesus' heart in the image is where all the blood and water came forth, and Scripture says it gushed forth. But Simeon said Mary's heart was going to be pierced by a sword also. Behold, this child is set for the fall and rising of many, and for a sign is spoken, and a sword will pierce through your own heart. And so they both had swords in their hearts, and they loved each other. Just imagine raising Jesus as a child and the faith of Mary. Can you imagine, like tonight, how many of you wives, what are you going to say if your husband wakes up and says, I just had a dream and we got to move to Tennessee? Would you take off and go? That was the faith of Mary. Okay? And again, I look at my own kids, their struggles, their pains, but yet you think of the pain that Mother Mary had as she saw her son scourged and crucified. And I don't know. It just breaks my heart to think about it, because it breaks my heart to think about my own kids and their own struggles. Next. The Holy Father in the encyclical Rich in Mercy said that no one has experienced to the same degree as the mother of the crucified one the mystery of the cross. Mary then is the one with the deepest knowledge of God's mercy. She knows its price. She knows how great it is. In this sense, we call her Mother of Mercy, Lady of Mercy, or Mother of the Divine Mercy. What is Mary's role? We get beat up for saying that we treat her as a god. What is her role? To always lead the way to her son. Period. That's it. She's no god. She was human, but bore her in her womb the Son of God. She's the new Eve and the new Ark of the Covenant. My soul magnifies the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God, for he has regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. That doesn't sound like somebody that's bragging or feels that she's a god. She was humble. Okay? The Ark of the Covenant. I said she's the new Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was considered by the Jews to be intrinsically holy, and there was a general consensus that the Ark of the Covenant carried the Ten Commandments. It was made of acacia wood and lined with gold. It was pure. And that's Mother Mary, lined with gold. Her womb was pure. She carried the Son of God. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was carried around the walls of Jericho when they were singing and before the walls came down. But interestingly, in the walls of Jericho, when it came tumbling down, they also found bottles and remains that had human bones in it, young children, infants. So it was felt that there was human sacrifice going on at that time. And you think about it, maybe the walls came tumbling down because of the human sacrifice and the murder of the infants, because the walls weren't stable. And so I think of our own country, the United States, and your country, Canada, with the abortions. The wall's going to come tumbling down like they did in Jericho. Now, in the Ark of the Covenant, the seat was lined with gold, and that was called the seat of mercy. It's also called the propitiatory. Now, Jesus, as you know, is the King of mercy. The propitiatory is also what's called on the space shuttle that heat shield that reflects the heat so the astronauts don't burn up. And in a way, that's also what Jesus does. He's the heat shield that died for us, took on our sins, and he bore the brunt. So it's an interesting correlation when you study about the Ark of the Covenant. Next. Our Lady appeared to Faustina many times. I humbly beg of you, cover my soul with your virginal cloak at this most important moment of my life, so that I may thus become closer to your Son and worthily praise your Son's mercy before the whole world and throughout all eternity. She wanted Mary's help to help her to get close to Jesus. And that's what we should ask also. Next. I mentioned a little bit about Our Lady of Cabejo. Mary Perrone gave me a beautiful CD. I haven't listened to it yet, but I can't wait till I get home on Our Lady of Sorrows, the Rosary. And I realized I didn't mention that last night, so I went back and put some stuff in on this. Our Lady of Cabejo appeared as Our Lady of Mother of the Word to the children in Rwanda. Rwanda is a beautiful country, mountainous in Africa. It's called the Little Switzerland. The Hutu and Tutsi tribes, as I said last night, were fighting. Mother Mary said, if you guys don't get your act together, there's going to be a river of blood. She appeared to Alphonse, Natalie, and Marie Claire and others. And then there was the genocide where over 1 million were killed within a 4-month period. Next. She asked the children to pray the Chaplet of the Seven Sorrows, the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows. If I remember correctly, it was started initially by the Servite order in about the 12th century. And it just goes through the 7 sorrows of Mary. And there's prayers. It's a little different than the regular rosary, but that's the... Can you go back one? If not, that's okay. It was just a picture of the apparition chapel there to the left where she appeared, and that's Natalie with Father Seraphim and I. Okay? And these are the 7 sorrows. The prophecy of Simeon we've mentioned, the flight into Egypt, ladies, get ready to leave. The loss of Jesus in the temple, the meeting of Jesus and Mary on the Via Dolorosa. And again, I would just ask you to think about that, what that must have been like when Mary and Jesus' eyes crossed and the mother seeing her son suffer so much. The crucifixion, the taking down of the body of Jesus, and the bodies placed in the tomb. Those were the 7 sorrows. And Mary said, if you said the 7 sorrows, it'll help you grow in spirituality and holiness, and it's a beautiful rosary. Next. There's many paintings and statues of Our Lady of Sorrows. That was one I found somewhere in, I think, New Orleans, and that one, the second one on the right there, is from the Philippines. But at any rate, it's the 7 swords piercing Our Lady's heart. Next. That's just me. I added the picture there with the kids in Rwanda, and we talked about the big Divine Mercy statue. So basically, you've got Our Lady and Jesus together in Kibeho, and hopefully continuing to heal the people of Rwanda. Next. I wanted to talk just a minute because the John Paul II Center has a relic of Maximilian Kolbe. There's a recent pilgrimage there, and they saw his place where he had his printing press and his little room and things. The Martyr of Charity, the Saint of Auschwitz. He founded the Militia Immaculata, an army for Mary. He was an apostle of Mary and really was the patron saint of the 20th century. Next. When Raymond was his given name, when he was a child, one day his mother was frustrated with him and said, "Raymond, what will become of you?" And he looked up to heaven and he said to Mary, "What will become of me?" So he went down to the church and he said, "Mary, what's going to happen? What will become of me?" And the Virgin Mary appeared to him holding in her hand 2 crowns, one white and one red. She looked at me with love and asked me if I would like to have them. The white meant that I would remain pure. The red meant that I would be a martyr. I answered yes, I wanted them. Then the Virgin looked at me tenderly and disappeared. So amazing, it was almost at that time he realized at some point in the future he would be a martyr. Next. As you know, if a prisoner escaped, 10 were to die, and they called the 10 men. One of them had a family. He was sobbing and said, don't take me, and that's when Maximilian Kolbe realized it was time, and he stepped forward and replaced the man. They put the guys in the hot chambers, closed the door. The other people in the camps could hear him. Kolbe was leading them in prayer. He was leading them in songs. He was reassuring them that soon they'd be with Jesus and Mary. And one by one, they began to die. The last one was Kolbe. And the Nazis were so infuriated that it's like he wouldn't die. So they went in and injected him with carbolic acid in his vein and killed him that way. He's actually one of the patron saints for drug addicts. And so if you have loved ones with addiction problems, pray to Maximilian Kolbe. Next. Kolbe actually believed that there are 2 immaculate conceptions. One is created and the other is uncreated. He wrote, the Father begets, the Son is begotten, and the Holy Spirit is the conception of the love between the Father and the Son. And the union of the Holy Spirit and Mary appeared at the incarnation, and the Holy Spirit lives in the spirit of the soul of the Immaculate in the very depths of her being. The Holy Spirit produces in a divine manner divine life itself in the womb of Mary's soul, making her the Immaculate Conception. Next. Kolbe believed that Our Lady leads us to do God's will. We return to God and we become saints. You have the big W, God's will. We got the small w, our will. And if we follow God's will, and it becomes a big S for saint. Next. Now, Kolbe didn't just want to ask for graces for Mary. You know, we pray and we ask for the grace for this and grace for that. He actually wanted to be the graces. And he wanted to teach everybody about the Blessed Mother. And that's why he started the printing press with all the Knights of the Immaculata. The Nazis hated him. He knew that it was just a matter of time till they got him. But they wanted to shut him down. He said, O Immaculata, Queen of heaven and earth, refuge of sinners and our most loving Mother, God has willed to entrust the entire order of mercy to you. Take with me all that I am and I have. Take with me all that I am and all that I have. I'm yours. Mold me, shape me, but I'm yours. Next. Now, in Our Lady Guadalupe, when she appeared and all the human sacrifice was going on in the 1530s, she was pregnant. And as you know, she's the patroness of the unborn. And they're just now, even the last several years, and more is being uncovered when they look at the tilma. Incredible things are being found. So I want to kind of weave in Our Lady as the patroness of the America's patroness of the unborn into about life. And again, a lot of what I'm going to say is what I've learned through my own mistakes, which I'll share with you. But when Roe v. Wade in America was decided by a 7-2 margin in 1973, many people thought it was a great day for women. They thought it was going to uphold the dignity of women. And instead, it's turned women into objects of sexual satisfaction. It's lessened male responsibility because the males go get an abortion. Go take the morning after pill. This is a one-night stand. I heard over and over that it was going to reduce child abuse. The thought was that the unwanted child would be the abused child, so we were going to actually be merciful by aborting those children. It's kind of tortured logic, but that was the thinking. Yeah, we got to abort these kids if they're unwanted because we're doing them a favor. And then thirdly, it was going to provide more stability to the institution of marriage because the woman wouldn't be afraid of getting pregnant, the man wouldn't be afraid of getting his wife pregnant, have more conversation. It was just going to be a good thing for marriage. But instead, the divorce rates have continued to climb, not decline. Recently, a priest said, well, in America, the divorce rate among young Catholics is decreasing. And I said, well, that's good, Father. He says, not really. They're all just living together. They're not even getting married. And maybe you see that, maybe that's the situation here as well. So abortion did not provide more stability to the institution of marriage. Okay? Abortion is really the antithesis of mercy. If you think about it, Jesus died so that we could live. Jesus died so the other could live. In abortion, it's just the opposite. The other dies so that I can live. I can keep my lifestyle, I can keep my way of living, I don't have to get married, or whatever reason goes on, the other has to suffer so that I can stay the same. So it's the antithesis of mercy. The lies. People would be against killing a fetus or killing an unborn human, so they changed the words. It's just a glob of cells, or it's just a piece of tissue. People go, well, that ain't so bad. You're just getting rid of a piece of tissue. So they beat us in the word game. When in actuality, the baby's heart is beating at 22 days. At week 8, every organ is in place. Bones are beginning to replace cartilage. And by the first trimester, fingerprints are formed. So it's not just a piece of tissue. Next. And yet we know that many women are put in a terrible spot. I was speaking just 6 months ago, a lady was telling me when she was 15, she got pregnant in high school, and she kept the baby, but her mother just went at her for months and months and wanted her to have an abortion. This was going to totally disrupt her, ruin her life, and she really put the pressure on her, and she and her mom used to have drag-out, knock-down fights. And she kept the baby. And her oldest son, Christopher, now is grandmother's favorite. And you just wonder the psychodynamics of all that. But Christopher's a wonderful young man, and she's just And I'm thinking, what a courageous woman. What a courageous woman to stick up to her mom and say, no way. And to think, yeah, this is going to be tough, but I'm not going to kill my son. And that lady has more courage than I'll ever have. And I just admire people like that tremendously. And yet, you got the boyfriend saying, if you don't get an abortion, I'm going to break up with you. You got grandma saying, we're going to kick you out. The other day, I was in Starbucks having a talk with John Paul. And he looks over at this young girl. He says, Dad, that girl over there is a sophomore. She's pregnant. And her parents said she had to have an abortion. She said no, so they kicked her out. And I think, how sad. We talked about last night the Divine Mercy message being a message of joy and love and hope. And one thing I realize is through thick and thin, we still have to love. You got to love. And this poor girl, I just hope, I almost at night, and I feel bad I didn't, I almost should have gone up to her and said, you can come live with us if you have to. You know, I hope I see her again. Abortion in many countries is used as a form of contraception. I was on a bus trip one time coming from Poland to the airport, and I was sitting with a nun from Latvia, which is old Russia. And she was saying that in Russia, many women have had 10 to 12 to 15 abortions. And these women go to confession and they're crying their eyes out. And the priests don't know what to do. And it's a real mess. And it's very sad. Next. When I was a pre-med student, just 19 years old, my sister called me one day and said her oldest daughter was going to have an abortion. And I said, well, it's no big deal. She'll get over it. She'll figure it out. Well, she had the abortion, and as statistics point out, 90% of the time when a boyfriend and a girlfriend, the girl gets pregnant, 90% of the time she has an abortion, the relationship breaks off within a month. 90% of the time. They broke it off. Sometime later, she met a young man she fell in love with. They got married. She got pregnant. And in about the 5th month of pregnancy, she delivered a child that the lungs weren't mature enough, and it lived about 6 hours in her arms and died. She got pregnant again. Same thing. In about the 5th or 6th month, she delivered a little baby whose lungs were immature and died in her arms. This happened 4 times. The 5th time, she was able to deliver a girl who's now just graduating from college. You fast forward about 25 years or more. I'm with Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life in a conference, and he came up to me and he said, we should write a booklet on healing through divine mercy after abortion. So I said, yeah, that'd be awesome. So I wrote part of the book on the divine mercy and confession and the medical complications. You see, there are many complications. You have psychological, social, emotional, spiritual. I could go down a long list. And one of the medical complications was a rare complication called incompetent cervix, which meant that after an abortion in about the 5th or 6th month, the mother would deliver this baby prematurely. The cervix couldn't hold the developing child, and she would deliver it, and it would die. And I read that, and I realized that was my niece. It was like somebody just ripped my heart out 25, 27 years later. And it's all part of my spiritual growth and spiritual learning in life. So we wrote Rachel Weep No More. And if you know anyone that has been involved in an abortion, or you just want to learn more about a lot of the complications and how to speak to women, or it's not just the women, the men. There was a sociologist who got his girlfriend pregnant, and they went into the abortion clinic, and she's in there having an abortion, and this guy finds himself getting really squeamy and antsy and nervous, and he's thinking about, my God, what if this is a boy? Maybe he'd be playing football with me. What about throwing the ball? Graduation, baptisms, all this stuff. Or if it's a girl, man, I'll never walk her down the aisle. So he's getting really uncomfortable. So he wanted to study it. That was his, degree, sociology. So he studied 1,000 men, and he found that 80% of them suffered from many of these symptoms and wondered. And it's tough on the moms and the dads of these aborted children, particularly Mother's Day, Father's Day, graduations, things like that, because they think back about the child that could have been. And it's not just some procedure that's done on Tuesday and you forget about it on Wednesday. That's the reality. Next. I didn't realize you guys are still doing partial birth abortion in Canada. America, we're so smart. We complain so much about partial birth abortion. Well, they got rid of that, but instead now they just inject potassium chloride through the umbilical vein, and the child goes into cardiac arrest. So, we're so smart in America. But in a partial birth abortion, the child is delivered in a breech fashion, everything but the head, which is only 1 second or 2 away from being delivered. And it's a healthy child. It's just seconds away from birth, and they grab the back of the neck. They make an incision in the back of the neck into the skull, and they put a suction catheter in there, and they suck out the baby's brains. That's what a partial birth abortion is. Now, I just read that there's a ethics professor from the United Kingdom who made the comment, well, there's no moral change in the child from coming down the birth canal, so he suggests partial birth abortion is okay. He thinks it's fine if a child is born and has some deformities that weren't picked up, that you should be able to kill it after it's born. You see, this is where we're going with all this stuff. It started out years ago in America. Well, what would you do if your 8-year-old daughter got raped and became pregnant? Well, abortions aren't being done because there's all these 8-year-old girls getting pregnant. We got on the slippery slope and we're sliding fast. In New York City, over half of the pregnancies in New York City are ending up in abortion. Years ago, I remember the government put out a statistic that our Social Security system, which is our retirement fund, was going to fail because we needed about 30 million people to help support all the old people that were getting to Social Security age. And someone looked at the numbers and said, well, that's pretty amazing. That's the number that we've aborted since 1973. Over 1 million a year. Mother Teresa was asked, if God's so merciful, why haven't we developed a cure for AIDS? And she said, God sent many people to cure AIDS, but we keep aborting them. Next. As I mentioned, this is actually not an Ivy League, it's from the UK, but he said he supported killing the child if it was born. There's actually another professor from Princeton in the Ivy League, the brilliant people from the Northeast in the United States, who's on one of the president's ethics committees. He said that he thinks parents should have the right up to about a child of 6 years of age to decide whether or not they want to kill it. So I remember years ago helping a friend at the church. She had a daughter with cerebral palsy, and she needed help eating. And the mom had gotten a new job, and the schedule was crazy, and she asked if she could drop Teresa off and stay with us during the day. So my wife did it and helped her and everything. And years later, I found out that Teresa graduated from the University of Tampa with a 4.0 and was getting her own career and things. But you see, we look on these people as deformed, not whole, and people say, oh, I wouldn't want to live like that. Well, then you get into that quality of life stuff, and who's going to judge? You know, I sure don't want our government being the judge. We're all in trouble. Next. As I mentioned last night, my wife told me when she was right before her 50th birthday, she was pregnant. October, she was 50. In December, delivered Claire Therese. That's my wife, my oldest daughter, and little Claire when she was 1 year old. We were at a wedding. This saying, I'm not healthy enough, I'm not wealthy enough, or I'm not wise enough to raise my baby. What about the adoption option? You know the irony, the craziness of it all? My niece that had the abortion, my other niece, who I'm her godfather, can't conceive. She is dying, she's breaking her heart because she can't have children. And here we aborted. It's just, what about adoption to a loving family? My pregnancy is a mistake, so I'm not going to have this child. Unplanned does not equal mistake. That's little Claire. Next. That's Claire a couple years ago at a soccer game, watching her brother and sister play soccer. And as I said last night, she brought so much joy to my dad before he died. And she and my wife are so close. I'll tell you though, there's nothing that gets my blood pressure up quicker than when someone says, what a beautiful granddaughter. Next. If you know of someone that's been involved in an abortion, we don't minimize the gravity of the sin, but we've also talked about the answer is through the sacrament of reconciliation, and there's no sin that's unforgivable, but you have to ask for God's mercy. And it really is lost in God's unfathomable ocean of mercy. And you have to accept His mercy. I think maybe I said last night about the lady that was in her 70s that said to me, I know you're a Catholic doctor. And then she told me the story of how she had had an abortion when she was 15. She had never told her boyfriend, who was her husband, and the tears were streaming down her cheeks. And she said to me, could God ever forgive me? There's so much shame and guilt. And I think as I travel, I see women who have had an abortion. They really struggle with loving themselves and really accepting God's forgiveness. But God is a loving God. And the quote from the diary, 7:23, the greater the sinner, the greater the right to my mercy. Next. Now, what about the other spectrum, at the end of the spectrum, the old elderly? The Germans wrote about eugenic euthanasia. Pope Pius XII was the first pope to write about euthanasia. He said it not only violates the natural and divine law written in the heart of every human, but it flies in the face of every sensibility of civilized humanity. And that's the truth. The Vatican II condemned the crimes against life: genocide, abortion, euthanasia, and willful suicide. And now I'm told, I couldn't find too much today when looking it up, but I'm told that in the Netherlands that if you're 16 and older, a teenager, and you know my kids, a couple of them have gone through depression in their teenage years with all the hormones flying around, that if they ask a few times that they can be euthanized. It's just crazy. Next. Nazi Germany in 1933, they passed the sterilization law. It permitted forced sterilization of genetically determined diseases: epilepsy, Huntington's chorea, which is a genetic disease, alcoholism, and there were a whole list of diseases. So if you had a drinking problem, you would be sterilized. In 1935, they passed the Nuremberg laws. It forbade citizenship to Jews and outlawed interracial marriage or sexual relations between Jews and others. And then in October 1939, the slope continued, and Hitler ordered the physicians to grant mercy death to those incurably sick. He said that we needed to be merciful to these old people who were sick in the hospitals because we had to make room for the war wounded. And over 70,000 people over the next 2 years were gassed and involuntarily euthanized. Involuntary euthanasia means you don't have a say in it. You know? Voluntary euthanasia we'll talk about in a second, but involuntary, they just went in and gassed them and they were gone because he said they needed room for the beds. Next. One ethicist wrote that the danger in a pluralistic society, you got all kinds of peoples, of moral nihilism, which is a rejection of the social mores, which I think we're in a state right now, with a lack of agreement, and there's certainly a lack of agreement upon ethical principles, is ever present. The Nazis killed to make room for the war wounded. What about those who use the sweet talk of money? We got better use of funds than for grandma's life. Let's get on with it. That's my mom. She had Alzheimer's disease. She's died now, but she would be a perfect candidate. It's an expense. You're not paying taxes. What good are you? We need the bed. Let's go. Next. The Netherlands, the country right next to Germany, who saw all the atrocities, who were the subject of atrocities. Euthanasia was technically illegal till a few years ago. It was in Article 293 of the Dutch Penal Code. And then they said we could do voluntary euthanasia, that is, the patient would ask for it, but there had to be 3 criteria met. The patients had to be persistently asking for it and had to be conscious and voluntary. There was an unbearable suffering. Well, unbearable suffering is again a slippery slope because what's unbearable to me may not be unbearable to you, and how do you define pain? And so that was a subjective. And then you had to have a consultation with a colleague. Well, I can tell you as a physician, the way the referrals work, it's so easy to get somebody to agree with you. So number 3 is kind of a joke. So you can see they've opened a door to voluntary euthanasia. Next. Now, Netherlands is a very small country. It's about the size of Tampa. It was obvious and agreed upon by everybody that the reporting was inaccurate of what they were doing with this voluntary euthanasia because it was technically illegal. So the doctors weren't even reporting all the cases. But then they started having a tendency, they started doing more and more involuntary euthanasia. There was no patient-informed consent, and the 2 doctors decided that the quality of life wasn't what they thought it should be. So the patient maybe came in for bronchitis and had another disease, and they said, your quality of life isn't what it should be. And they put an IV in, and you were gone. Now that, to me, really slaps in the face of doctor-patient relationship, because you may be going in thinking you're going to get some antibiotics, and instead you got an overdose, which is kind of frightening. The government reported more than 1,000 cases yearly of active involuntary euthanasia in this small country of the Netherlands. Of those 1,000, without consent of the patients, the doctors said 30% was for refractory pain and 70%, the majority of it, was for a low quality of life. So if you're a Down syndrome, if you're a cerebral palsy, if you've got some unusual medical disease, and the doctor says, boy, that isn't a good quality of life. You're going to be euthanized. That's the slope, that's the trend, and that's the reality. Next. Conclusions on this was that the average physician, you might think, oh, my doctor would never do that. Well, the average physician in the Netherlands was easily convinced to perform immoral acts alone or as part of a large group. And the history of moving from small to big in Germany, when the exceptions to the sanctity of life are made, the basically saying there is, you start out with what many people can say, yeah, I can understand that. That's a good intention. And then the doors open and you just let the horse out. And it's a very slippery slope. And you've got ethicists and people at these high institutions who are serving on these government boards that have no faith, they don't believe in God, and they're looking at it like, may as well put them down. You know, their life's useless. They don't understand suffering. They don't understand the Christian walk. And it's crazy. And in the Netherlands, the history was moving from voluntary to involuntary. And all this is happening today. And it's getting more and more and more. Next. In February of this year, Belgium became the first country to remove age restrictions on euthanasia. There used to be like pediatrics was taboo, but not anymore in Belgium. There's an Oregon proposal. If you're under 15, you need parental consent to be euthanized, but if you're over 16, the 16-year-olds can decide on their own. So if they come in and complain how bad life is, you know, mom doesn't cook the meals, dad doesn't let me use the car, I'm severely depressed, my acne's so bad, I want to be euthanized, it's legal. Has voluntary euthanasia put us on the slippery slope to involuntary? It would appear so. Next. I look at my own father. He died at age 94. He had colon cancer when he was 45 years old. It had spread into the bowel wall. I was 6 years old at the time, and I remember going up to the hospital. Mom says, the doctors are going to let you see Dad. He may not make it. And I remember going up to his bedside and seeing all these tubes and things coming out. My dad survived, miraculously, really. He had chemo, radiation, and I look back and I admire him so much because he was an insurance salesman, which meant he lived on commission. And so he had to go out and make the bread and butter for 6 kids and his wife when he had radiation and chemotherapy. And I don't know how he did it. I really don't know how he did it. But he had a deep faith. He was a convert. And they say converts make the best Catholics. You know, those of us who are born in Catholic, we just took it all for granted, never really got into it. But he got into it. I never imagined my father walking with a walker. I remember the first time I saw him with a walker. He had had back surgery, and he came to our house to stay. And I looked over, and he's hunched over, and he's walking. I'm like, oh my God. My dad's an old man. I never imagined having to bathe him. I never imagined having to clean his pants. I never imagined having to do all the things I did in the last 2 years. And it wasn't easy. He used to call me all the time because his memory was starting to go. And I'd be doing ministry stuff or the property stuff or both, and he'd call me, and I still remember, he'd say, what you doing? And I'm up to here, you know, running around like a chicken with his head cut off, and I'd try and take him to our house 3, 4, 5 nights a week, so I'd go pick him up, I'd dress him in the morning, I'd run back to his facility at night and get him ready for bed, have him over for dinner as much as I could, and he loved ice cream. That was his big treat. So after every meal, I get him this big bowl of ice cream. Seeing Claire brought such joy. But all those days are gone. No more phone calls. No more picking him up, taking him to the house. No more dropping Claire off, having him run up to Grandpa. It was kind of like it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But now I look back and I'm so thankful that I honored my father, I took care of him, and I have no regrets. But it's a shame when people walk into a facility like where my mom is and think that these people are of no value. I say, hey, wait a second, that's my mom. She did a lot of good things in her life. She was a beautiful person. The beauty and gift and holiness and sanctity of life. We have to stand up and be counted. What was the saying during World War II? They came for the gays, I said nothing. They came for the Jews, I said nothing. They came for the Catholic priests, I said nothing. And then they came for me and there was no one left. The silence was deafening. We're in tough times. Next. How do we define success? What is your goal in life? I tell people, stay in the day. Don't beat yourself up about yesterday. Don't worry too much about the future. That's my battle as well. But stay in the day, enjoy the gift of time. Today is really the first day of the rest of your life. Live it to the fullest. Try to love your kids. Try to love your wife. Try to love your husband. Don't be afraid to tell people you love them. Nobody's guaranteeing us tomorrow. I could go down on the plane tomorrow. If I do, pray for me. But thank God right now, as of right now, I'm in a state of grace. Someone said to me, one of their loved ones was going to the Pentecostal or something church, and they said they were saved. And I said, well, right now I am too. But that doesn't mean I know myself. That doesn't mean tomorrow I will be. But being saved just means, I know Jesus and I'm in a state of grace. But we don't think as Catholics that just because we say I'm saved going to mean 5-10 years from now that we're not going to commit a serious sin. We're all human. We got to stay close to the sacraments. We got to get rid of all our garbage that we carry around. Lack of forgiveness, anger, jealousy, all of our we're not good enough stuff. We tell ourselves that Satan plays that record. It's like when I go to confession. Sometimes I feel like telling Father, here's the cassette tape, play it again. I was on a trip one time and the plane stopped in Las Vegas. And I remember, I never forgot it. I was coming off the plane, and there's all these slot machines in the airport. And I'm like, and these people were just bang, bang, bang. And I said, man, I'm glad that's not my problem. I walked away from that. It didn't mean anything to me. That was their problem. I have my own problems. You have your own problems. But we get discouraged because we don't see the spiritual growth. We're not changing. But that's not true. You just got to keep trying. The good Lord wants you to keep trying. And this message of mercy is all about joy and hope. All the struggles. I heard so many stories this weekend. Some of your burdens and sufferings and trials are incredible. Don't give up. Don't lose the faith. The story of St. Monica is not just some legend. I told my kids over Easter, I said, the story of Jesus is not just some fairy tale. This isn't what just made up, that Catholics contrived so they could build all these churches or whatever. Like Jesus lived. We know that. He died. And we know and believe in the resurrection. But love your faith. Live your faith. That's why, for me, I love the Cenacles, because the Divine Mercy message is really like a reiteration of sacred Scripture put in a different way. I love reading the Bible, and I love reading St. Faustina. Today I was just going through the diary a little bit, and the Lord was telling her, My kingdom on earth is my life in every human soul. I thought, wow. We wonder what the kingdom would be like on earth. And it's Jesus being in every soul and living and loving and caring for each other. So that's really next. So in all our struggles, you know where to turn. You got the Blessed Mother. We got all these angels and saints in heaven gone before us. These saints are not fictional people, It's like Pope John Paul II. And probably Father, many of you, I actually shook his hand. He was a live human being. He was a good, holy man. And these people that have gone before us to set examples and to help us and guide us in our earthly struggles, this stuff isn't make-believe. It's real. But we got to learn our faith and then live it. So whatever parish you come from, I'd encourage you, get involved, go to Father and say, how can I help? And let everybody know by our actions, not by our mouth. You should evangelize always, St. Francis said, and if you need, open your mouth. You evangelize by the way you live. Appreciate the beauty and the gift of life. Tonight's almost over. Tomorrow, it's just a memory. I'll be back in the States, but I can say with all sincerity, I've made some wonderful friends. We're brothers and sisters, and pray for me, and know that I'll be praying for all of you. God bless you, and thanks for coming.